Let's see if this new case from EGS can stand up to the torture test.
All right, so let's go ahead and take some time to examine this new case from EGS. And I think potentially one of the best ways to do this is to draw some comparisons between the new case from EGS to that of CGC and also CBCS. So I have slabs from those companies here on the table, and I'm going to try to draw some comparisons between the three of them, because I think that that may be a helpful thing for people to be able to appreciate. So this probably isn't the best way to do this, but for the sake of this video, I've gone ahead and stacked the three slabs together, EGS here, CGC, and CBCS. And what you can notice from this, hopefully from this angle, is that the EGS slab is actually the shortest of the three. The tallest by far is CBCS, and kind of in the middle is the CGC slab. So does this height thing really matter? Not really, but again, it's one of the things that I wanted to point out to people as a observable difference between them. From the same vantage point, you might also be able to notice the thickness, if you will, of the slabs. And it should be noted that the EGS slab by far is the thickest of the three. The thinnest is CBCS. Now, there isn't much of a difference, in all honesty, between the EGS slab and that from CGC. There really isn't a whole lot of difference, and it really isn't all that noticeable. And I say that because when you actually pick up the CBCS slab, it feels thin. There is no doubt about that. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it feels thin in comparison to a CGC slab, and also in comparison between a EGS slab. Now, when you compare these two, I think you can pick up on the fact that the EGS is a little bit thicker, but it's not a terribly noticeable thing the same way as the CBCS slab feels in terms of its thinness. So it's there, but not as noticeable, I don't think. The other thing is when you stack all of these together, what you probably will also be able to see, at least I think, is that when you stack them together, if I can get them in the right position, what you potentially can see there is that the CGC slab, which is on top, is actually the narrowest of the three. So it is the narrowest from left to right of the three, followed by EGS, and then followed by CBCS. So CBCS is the widest for sure as you stack the three of them together, and they did just slip there just a little bit. Now, again, the same thing with the height and with the thickness. The width, in my mind, really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you're roughly going to fit about the same number of these slabs in a bin as you would any other, right? They're all roughly the same. I mean, you may be able to get maybe one extra CBCS in there because it is so thin, but generally there's not a whole lot of difference between the CGC and EGS slabs. And it's apparent to me, I think, that the EGS slab is patterned more after the industry leader, which makes a whole lot of sense in my mind. One of the other big questions that people may have out there is around clarity. Clarity is a huge thing, and I think CBCS has struggled with that in previous years, where there appeared to be almost a blue tint, if you will, to the CBCS slabs. They have dramatically improved that with their most recent slab offering. And honestly, as I look at the clarity of the slab from EGS, it appears to be on par. It really does appear to be on par. There is maybe a little bit of a grayness to it, maybe a slightly gray tint, but not really noticeable. And I've actually looked at the three slabs side by side in different light. And again, the EGS slab appears to be just as clear as the other two. Nothing as noticeable, again, as the CBCS blue tint that they had in previous years. So again, just wanted to kind of point that out. Another big thing is how does the EGS slab feel in your hand, right? I can tell you that this book does not feel cheap. in my hands. It doesn't have that cheap feeling. As I rub my fingers across the rim of this book, there is definitely a lip that exists around it, and my thought is that that allows for the stacking of the slabs together to kind of lock in place, the same as what we've seen from both CBCS and also from CGC. What I will tell you is that the lip that is on here is just as noticeable, I think, as the lip that is on CBCS. Maybe a little more pronounced here on the CBCS versus the EGS slab. The CGC slab has more of a curved texture to it. It's not as rough, if you will, as what you get with CBCS, and again, a little less pronounced here, but definitely something that is noticeable. And I don't have two of these here to be able to stack them together, but I would imagine that they stack quite nicely. Again, the slab feels substantive in the hand. There is some sturdiness to it, and I will tell you that there's also a certain amount of rigidity to this as well. The early slabs from both of the other companies felt less sturdy and less rigid in the hand than does this feel. There is also, let me see if I can get it. There is no real twist to this. I think you may have heard a little bit of a click, but there's no real flex to the slab that I can appreciate, which I think is a very good thing. Again, you saw that a little bit more with these others, but you don't necessarily see that here. I will tell you that there is a little bit of movement if you shake this, and we'll see whether the microphone can pick it up. But there is definitely some movement here, and I think that has to do with this inner maybe sleeve. I think it's a sleeve and not necessarily a well that's on the inside that is moving. And I've seen that same thing with certain slabs that have come out from CGC or certain books. I don't think that I've ever seen that with CBCS, but there is definitely some movement here in this inner well. A couple of other things that I want to point out before I start to really dig into the EGS slab is that I actually weighed all three of the slabs because I was just curious what the weight of them might be, to the point of some of them feeling, maybe a little more sturdy than others. I wanted to evaluate the weight, and I threw them on a digital scale, and roughly the CGC and CBCS came back around 1 pound, just about 1 pound. The EGS slab, however, was heavier at about 1 pound, 1 ounce. And again, that could be attributed to potentially the material and construction and the size and thickness of the EGS slab, or it can also be the weight of the books that are here. If I had all three books that were all the same, I think it would be a more fair comparison, but I at least wanted to throw them on a scale to see if there was a weight difference. And I will tell you that in the hand, they feel roughly the same. I don't know that I'm picking up the EGS book and I'm like, whoa, that's heavy. That weight difference I don't think is material, but again, I wanted to kind of point it out to you guys. So as I dig into this slab a little bit more, there are some noticeable things that are happening with this slab that maybe you don't see on these, and I want to point that out for people. One of the things that I noticed right away is that the top label for EGS is actually affixed to the outside of the case, and I'm guessing they use some kind of adhesive to affix it to the outside of the case. This is very similar to the first generation of what we got from CGC. CGC had this on the outside, and it did not hold up very well over time. With CGC, eventually the label started to peel, and I have several in the collection that are kind of peeling off. I'm assuming that EGS used better adhesive than maybe what CGC used back in the day, but that is one noticeable difference. And if you're not terribly familiar with some of these, the other two companies actually have that top label on the inside of the case. It's actually inside and not affixed to the top of the case. So again, that's one thing that I wanted to kind of point out. Another thing that I wanted to talk about here is that the label that sits at the top of the case actually sits a little high, and you can see that there's a little bit of room here between the inner well seal and the bottom of the label. the top of the label actually sits pretty high, and it's actually partially obscured by that rim that I spoke about before, and hopefully you can actually see that. I don't know if this was one that just wasn't shifted down enough, but that was one of the things that I noticed, is that you cannot see the top of the label as clearly as what you may get with the other companies. And I think potentially part of the reason for that is the other companies basically have a little bit of a notch or a cutout, if you will, a section specifically for the label that is sized for the label, whereas this is a little bit bigger and it appears to just kind of sit inside the case. It's not really affixed. And again, I don't know if you guys will be able to pick that up on camera. It's just kind of free floating in there almost. And again, this is my observation. We'll see how these produce over time and whether that holds true. But I will tell you that the label is, one of the great things about EGS is that they have these customizable labels, which I think is great. It's a great way to kind of personalize a slab to make it match and complement the comic, which I think is a good move. They have their holographic thing over here in the upper right hand corner, which I think is great. One of the other things that I noticed here, and you may be able to again see it here, is that there are these rivets. There are 3 rivets down the side, down each one of the sides, and my guess is that this is how they essentially seal the front and the back side of the slab together. That is my guess. And I don't know what the technology is. I don't know if that is melted in there to create that seal, but that is a noticeable thing that I wanted to point out, that there's essentially these rivets that are there that are noticeable. And when you rub your finger down the side, and in certain places, there is a little bit of some texture there, some extra material. Again, not all that dissimilar from what you might get with the other slabs here. You can actually potentially see that same little technology here, where maybe it's melted or whatever it is. And this does have more texture than does the one from EGS. But again, another thing that I wanted to point out. And you all may have noticed, if you're paying attention and if the angle is right, you may actually be able to notice that this book is actually crooked in the slab. And I think that is because this inner sleeve that's in there is actually crooked. And it's definitely more pronounced as you go down the book. You may be able to notice that it's a little off its center in here. And so that's just a little bit of I think of a quality control thing that will probably be addressed over time. But you can notice here at the very top, it's definitely closer to that inner seal than if you go down the book. It's definitely shifted more to the left on the bottom. But again, just one of those things that I wanted to kind of point out to you guys. And as I mentioned, there is a little bit of movement here, but I think it's that inner sleeve that's moving versus the book that's actually moving on the inside. But I need to observe that a little bit more just to be certain. On the back side of the case, again, clear on the back side, you can see the serial number here, which I think is kind of cool. Basically illustrates that they have continued to grade more and more books if the serial number is correct. So as I get ready to wrap up here, I have to tell you that I believe that this is a wonderful entry point for EGS. They should be very proud of this product because it is head and shoulders, in my mind, above where a first generation CGC case was. And if you've ever held a first generation CGC slab, you know exactly what I mean. It felt flimsy, it felt delicate. That is not the case here. This is substantive, it is rigid, it is sturdy. And I think that if you do decide to get a book graded by EGS, you will be pleasantly surprised with the quality of what ultimately shows up. I was able to point out over the course of this video some differences that exist between this slab and the others, some things that I think potentially need to be improved upon in terms of quality. But from a presentation standpoint, this slab is solid.